Hi, and welcome to the Cornelius Seed Podcast. Thank you for checking out our podcast. Established in 1935, we're an American-owned and family-owned independent seed company. And we're excited to partner with you in our new podcast by bringing you 5 generations of agricultural experience and decades of industry expertise. In our podcasts, you can expect to gain valuable and timely information to aid you in making decisions for your operation. We'll keep things simple and informative, and much like our motto, Planet Profit. Welcome back to the Cornelius Seed Podcast. I'm joined by Craig Allaman, our lead agronomist, who recently wrote an article discussing the effects of temperature and moisture on planting soybeans and corn. We'll be diving into some of the key takeaways from his research, including the ideal temperature range for soybeans, the critical period for soybean emergence, and the consequences of planting in too wet or too cold conditions. We'll also be discussing some real-world scenarios and the results of planting soybeans right before a big temperature drop. So whether you're a seasoned farmer or you're just starting out, stay tuned for some valuable insights. So welcome, Craig.
Thank you, Juan. It's good to be back.
Likewise, I think it's been a while, but now it's the season's rolling again. I think we'll have plenty of these to keep rolling out as well.
Yeah, we're already started off to another interesting year. We had some good start in a few places with good weather, good soil conditions, good temperatures, and then we got cold again, and now we have additional cool and wet weather. So there's no average year anymore, and this year's no different.
That's definitely for sure. I when I go back and think about a lot of the training that you do for the sales team, or whenever you recap the year, you often talk about that Mother's Day freeze, but it looks like we've already experienced some of that before then, and that's kind of where I wanted to dive in. In your article, you mentioned the potential harm that freezing temperatures can have on newly emerged soybeans. Could you tell us more about this and what ramifications are there for the soybeans that were planted in early April and that have already emerged and maybe in some freezing temperatures?
Yeah, so early planted soybeans is really, they have really become pretty widely adopted across the Midwest. Farmers are very quick to grab onto new technologies or new techniques and incorporate them in their system. So we've seen a lot of early planted soybeans. This is the third, maybe fourth year where it's been pretty widely used. So, but probably the year that we have gotten beans in the earliest, we've been kept out of the field in a large percentage of acres across the Midwest last 2-3 years because it's been too wet and we've had late starts. But we had some really good conditions in a scattered throughout kind of our footprint that week after Easter. So, people a lot of times will wait on Easter to start. And this year was no different. Just so happened that temps had been good. So soil temps were in the low 50s. Soil conditions in a lot of places were really ideal. And I have said many times, from a personal perspective, my favorite thing about early planted soybeans is it keeps me out of the corn planter when I should not be in the corn planter. In other words, when the ground is really not quite warm enough for corn, but I'm not nearly as concerned about beans. And a lot of that is because we can pay a little bit of a price on population on soybeans and not be hurt. Beans can compensate in a million different ways throughout the season. Whereas corn, if we reduce stand early on, or if we injure that stand early on, we just simply won't recover a lot of that yield. So it's much more. You need to be much more precise with when you want to start planting corn versus soybeans. So we started, here in our operation, we started on that Monday the 10th. Had some good soil conditions, a little bit chilly yet, but we planted our beans. I think we finished on Wednesday. We planted all of them and then switched over to corn on Thursday. And I felt real good about the conditions, the soil temps and everything to get into the corn. Probably could have went Wednesday on corn, but Thursday was sure a good day. And then we started seeing some change in the temperature forecast coming up, and they were showing Saturday night into Sunday we were going to get down into those low 30s. So we sent out an alert and suggested that we would probably want to shut the corn planters down at dark on Friday, because with corn, that initial drink of water, that imbibition that kernel of corn does, soaking in that initial water, that needs to be warm, and we would like it to be 50 degrees, plus. Um, what's that magic number that you really get in trouble? Probably somewhere in the low to mid 40s. But we want to err on the side of having that at 50 degrees. So with those temps coming in, we just said, we need at least 24 hours, up to 48 to get that initial drink. And so planters need to shut down dark on Friday. Soybeans, a little different there. Soybeans, not a perfect stand at 8 hours, but if you get 8 hours of good warm temperatures following a soybean planting, you're going to have, a good enough stand probably to do what you need to do. And then more like that 24 hours to have that perfect stand. So, we recommended noon the next day on Saturday to shut down the planters, the soybean planters. And I think that was a pretty good call. Everything I've looked at since then looks to be very, did that imbibition, doesn't look like we got imbibitional chilling in the corn or the beans. We had some beans come out of the ground then that we planted on the 10th, on the 19th, they're cracking the surface. So that kind of comes back to your question there initially. What about these beans that were planted early? Is this cold weather that we're having now, and we had over this past weekend, a problem? And so, we had corn emerge and had 2 nights in a row where we had 30-degree temps. I was not worried, because what we know about soybeans is that it takes temps somewhere in the range of 28 to 30 degrees for several hours. I've always kind of used 28 degrees for 4 hours in a row as kind of a rule of thumb, but somewhere between the 28 and 30 degrees for several hours to have injury on those newly planted soybean or newly emerged soybeans. Soybeans will produce a substance that's similar to antifreeze in our car. So, they have some defense against that, against those cold temps when they're coming out of the ground. So looks like, just like we expected, looks like they're fine. Took a picture yesterday morning that, and I went out on a tweet, and it's just showing that those emerged soybeans look like they came through that cool temps really, really good. So that's kind of where we sit today. But we're looking at, the next question is, well, when we get going again. Now we did have a secondary window the following. We shut down corn planters on the Friday, and then the following Wednesday into Thursday, we had a couple of good days there where we got some more planting done, but again, called for the planters to shut down because we were going to dip down into the cold again. But I think that imbibition process was fine. That planting window should be good as long as you shut down in time. And now here we sit, and it's looking like probably Wednesday into Thursday of next week before we really get into temps where we want to get out there and plant again. Otherwise, we're going to be planting those kernels into that cold water, and that's a mistake you don't want to make,
Well,
particularly with corn.
well, and that makes sense. I appreciate you clarifying that. I'm sure we can't stress that enough. So I mean, it sounds like, from what you're saying, the soybeans, and you said before, they're very flexible and they can survive those quick dips, when it's dipping into 30, 31, just as long as it's not there too long. What, for the folks that are out there and just scouting, I guess, for damage, for lack of a better word, um, when is the best time to scout for that, to see if you need to determine to do something, and if you do need to do something, what can you do if there is damage?
Well, whether it's corn or soybeans, if you've had cold injury to emerged plants, you want to give it between 3 and 5 days before you get back out there and look and see what kind of damage there is. And you're just going to have, as you typically would think, from freezing, you'll have some water soaked initially, and then it'll, that tissue will die and turn brown and just have regular necrosis on it. And, the, the other great thing about, planting early soybeans, if you have an issue this time of the year where you're going to have to replant, you're still planting, probably planting by that window where you always used to plant. So it's not like you're late, behind the eight ball. Used to be you plant beans in early May and you had a problem and you had to replant, then you might be mid-June and you're going to lose some yield by that time of the year. But the yield that we're gaining by planting these soybeans early and getting more time spent in that R2 stage of putting more nodes on the plant because we've started flowering early on the early side of the summer. That's the whole key that we're doing with this early planting soybeans. So that's additional yield, and you might lose that additional yield, but you're still in a replant situation from early planting soybeans. You're still at that what a typical yield would be. So, it's a great program. I'm a huge believer in it, and in a cold window like we have right now, when these soils are cold, and we're waiting for them to warm back up, and hopefully in the low 50s before we get started again. There's going to be 2-3 days where I think you'll be just fine planting soybeans, but I think you're probably too cold for corn. So get out there in that planter, get them switched over while you're waiting, and take advantage of those 2-3 days of soybean planting, and then switch that planter back over to corn when it's fit. Because again, mistakes made early on during planting and early emergence on corn, you will not recover from that. You just simply won't. Whereas soybeans can recover, again, 1,000 different ways.
Yeah, that's I know you can't say that enough. That's for sure. So if there isn't, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here before we move on, but just if they're out there and they're scouting for damage and it doesn't really quite warrant a replant situation, and we, you're going to keep an eye on them and just see how they progress. Is there any fertilizer that you can put on that you recommend, or is it too early to even start thinking about that stuff?
Yeah, it's probably too early to worry about anything else. I mean, you're you're just going to have to let nature take its course at that time and determine what kind of a stand that you had left out there. And you want to get, visit your Iowa State Extension or your Purdue Extension notes, and there's all kinds of information out there about counting population and determining whether you have a good enough stand or not. I haven't seen anything that alarms me that we may have those kind of an issues with any soybeans so far.
Good.
But it's still early. And the corn I've seen, again, planted in those windows where we had those, those warm, moist soils where we initially imbibe for that first 24 to 48 hours. That corn looks real good and healthy that I've dug. The radicle is probably an inch or so long, corn that was planted that 12th or so of April. And, that coleoptile, that sprout that's going to start heading up, that it looks good and healthy. So I don't see any issues right now. I don't see a big problem with what we've got in the ground, but that can change. And, we get heavy rains, and we have had heavy rains in places. That's where you really get hurt, where you got heavy rains and saturated soils and crusting and things like that. So there'll be some places where there'll be issues. There always is, but I'm not too alarmed by what we have had so far. And as the calendar, starts ticking here, I know people were getting nervous. I'm the same way. We've got probably 40% of our corn left to plant. But you remember last year, we didn't get in until that first week in May. Ton of it went in that, middle of May timeframe, and we just had a tremendous crop. But, we were forced, because we were wet, we were forced to wait until the soils warmed up. So everything went in good, warm conditions. Took that initial drink of water under warm conditions and emerged very rapidly. That's the other thing too. We got, when you have rapid emergence, you wait, and your patience, you don't sit there and soak up soil-borne fungal diseases. That's probably the bigger thing that, I would be worried about right now with this corn that's sitting in the ground and it's not coming out. is we'll be soaking up things like Rhizoctonia, Fusarium, and the worst, which is Pythium. Pythium is worse than the other two combined. Those are water spores. They swim in moisture. The spores do to get to the roots that they'll infect, or the seed, and so they're going to have plenty of time to get there. Now we switched. Well, we didn't switch, but there was a new product kit that came out for Pythium a couple years ago. We immediately jumped on that because we have identified for a long time that's the worst problem that our customers have in the area that we do business. And so we saw that as needed. It costs us, I mean, the same price as it used to be for the seed treatment. It comes with a bag. There's no extra charge, but it's just our business is providing seed and enhancing it and protecting it for our customers. So we jumped on that Viantis. It's part of our package, and this is the type of the year where it should really, really pay, because the Pythium is doing its thing as we speak on that corn that's been planted, and it's going to be infecting those roots. And Viantis is far and above better than anything that's on the market. So it's a step change, and we're pretty excited about having it on our seed.
I agree, and I think it helps folks have that little extra peace of mind. When expect the unexpected when it happens, and the weather can change by the day, by the hour. Moving on a little bit onto the and you've kind of already really talked about this, but I just wanted to package it up nice and together on some of those factors to consider for this next planting window that folks are going to capitalize on. Uh, what are the three most important things that people need to keep in mind when they are deciding to get back out there again?
Well, the three legs of that stool that we always look at for planting are moisture and temperature and calendar date. Now we know, everybody knows what the best calendar date to plant corn beans is in your area. You've done it forever. You've got universities that have done studies locally. Okay, but you have to remember, as we saw last year, and as we're in a year where it looks like we're going to be a little delayed in planting, the average planting date is made up of highs and lows, of earlies and lates. It's not, if your average planting date is the 20th to the 25th of April, it's not that way every year. That average comes from, some years where it's the first week in May, and some years where it's the 15th of April. So I don't think we should get too alarmed by that. We won't know what the best planting date is in 2023 until this fall, when we see where the yields come from. This early stuff that we've already got in might end up being the best. It might start to get hammered with soil-borne fungal diseases and be no better than mid-May planted, or not as good. So, the thing of it is we really can't skimp on moisture, okay? Because if we get in there where it's too wet, we're going to have sidewall compaction. We're going to have wheel traffic compaction. That's just a mess that we don't want to get into. So we need to have soils that are adequately dry before we get in there. We all know that. And then temperatures that's just a personal decision. But you know for a fact that if you imbibe a cold drink of water with that corn when it's first planted, that you're going to get some type of imbibitional chilling, imbibitional injury. And that could be seed that doesn't even germinate. I mean, it could completely stop it. That cold water makes those cell walls brittle. And so when those cell walls are dividing, and that, that kernel, when it's first germinating, and you make them brittle, they're just gonna explode, basically, just as they're splitting. So imbibitional chilling is a huge problem, and we want to stay away from that. So wait until you get that soil temperatures in that low 50 range is pretty important. We could still get some cold injury. We could start seeing those plants that leaf out under the ground. They kind of circles in the ground. I mean, they're kind of confused, that the cold injury that you'll see in corn that's newly emerging, but that's not nearly as injurious as the imbibitional chilling is. Okay. And again, on the soybeans, soybeans require less time to get a stand that's going to be good enough. Okay. Because soybean populations is a huge range, and you don't know what's going to be the best population, until we see what the weather was like during the growing season. But you can, I'm just going to throw out 110 to 160,000. I mean, that range is going to be 100% yield potential depending on the year. So, you've got a lot more margin of error, and you only need about 8 hours to get that good, warm drink of water. You don't want to plant soybeans into mid 30 soil temps. I mean, they're not foolproof. You won't have a very good stand if you do that. But if you can get that, those temps up and get at least 8 hours, that's why we can start on the soybeans before we can on the corn and stay away from some of those issues.
Well, in your article, you shared a chart, if I remember correctly, a study from University of Nebraska-Lincoln that
Yep.
illustrated that importance of starting with that soil temperature at the 60-degree range. Tell us a little bit about that for the folks that haven't seen that.
Yeah, this was basically it was a lab study, but it really shows you what cold temperatures or the importance of having that warm soil does for soybeans. And basically they had the temperature that they put these soybean seeds into was 60 degrees. It was already at that, had warmed up. Why they chose 60, I don't know. On the low end, they chose 36, but that's what they chose. But if you started out in warm soils and you had that warmth for at least 8 hours, you were getting about a 75% stand. Now, we'd like to have, we'd rather have 90% stand, but a 75% stand is going to get us where we need to be. If you go 48 hours, then you were looking more that 80% in the, upper 80s type of stand. But that 75%, that's why I say 8 hours. If we can get 8 hours of those warm conditions, that's going to get us where we need to be on soybeans. I'd rather have it get warm and stay warm. That's really what we saw last year, and that's where some of our excellent stands came from. But on the flip side of that, if you started out with temps at that 36-degree range, there was really nothing that there was really no time frame that was good there. I mean, 36 degrees for 2 hours and then warming it up was only a 35% stand, So, and then of course, 36 degrees for, several hours, it just kept getting worse. So that's not acceptable. That's a replant situation there for sure. So you got to wait, the soybeans are not bulletproof. You've got to wait till those temps get good, but you've just got a shorter window of needing to get that warm drink of water than you do with corn.
Well, that appreciate you expanding on that. I think you had a real world scenario from last year. I think it may have been one of your neighbors on.
Yep. April 24th last year, watching my neighbor. I had already decided that wasn't going to plant. It was a Saturday. So we decided we were looking at the temps, and we decided we'll start Sunday. Temps looked good by the time we'd start, maybe 10 in the morning, and they were rising then after that. So I felt good about it. My neighbor's out there Saturday, and I'm driving by shaking my head, and I'm thinking, oh, goodness, I think that's not good. Well, so I watched that field all year thinking, particularly during emergence, thinking he's not going to get a good stand. He had just had a beautiful stand. So I went back and looking at this University of Nebraska study, and I looked back when he started planting and when he stopped and what the temperatures were that day. And that's the graph I think you're remembering. But, the temps about 10 o'clock in the morning in soil temps should have been excellent. I mean, they're going to be mid 50s and peaking out at probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But by about 10 o'clock, that's when I it looked like the trouble, the trouble mark was, and that was the reason I wasn't starting that day. Well, I looked when he planted. I mean, he was planting there at 10 o'clock, and probably took him a couple hours to plant that field, and he hit that 8 hour mark. So I don't think he did it on purpose. I mean, he probably kind of fell into that. But when he planted, he had a good 8 hours before that soil temp got cold, and it didn't remain cold for long. The duration of the cold is a big part of it too. So, but yeah, that was a real world example that I thought was pretty neat. It was a
Well,
field version of that lab study
that
that they did.
and that's precisely kind of what I wanted to bring it up, and I think everybody listening can understand that those perfect lab conditions on a petri dish or whatever it is, however it's done, it's not always the same. And we've talked about temperature quite a bit, and soil temp, and if for whatever reason someone doesn't have access to a soil thermometer, uh, how does air temperature forecast, can it help predict the soil temp for, I
Yeah,
guess, the critical period after planting?
yeah. I remember back in the early 2000s, we had a soil probe when I was working in retail, and we would have graphs right on our computer, live graphs of what was going on out there, and it really hit home with me that once soil temps warm up, so I'm going to say 1st of April, from the winter months, once soil temps warm up, that 2 inch temperature, that 2 inch depth where we're placing that seed is going to follow air temps pretty closely. I mean, there's always a lag, both going up and coming back down. But especially if the soil's not saturated, if there's air, there's air pockets there to be able to penetrate down in there. So I look when I get to be planting season time, I just look at air temperatures, knowing my soil temperature is going to be pretty close to that. It's not exact, and there is some lag, of course, but boy, if you watch air and soil temperatures, those charts, they just follow each other.
Uh, that's uh that's good to to know. Um, I feel like we've covered quite a bit of topics. I think for me, just some key takeaways. It's just been that you know, f- eh, soybeans will be more flexible, and if you're gonna do anything, get out there and do them first. They can be impacted by freezing temps, and it's imperative that you go out there and scout, and then again 3 or 5 days later there could be consequences to planting either too early, or it's too wet. You talked about compaction, and even just the effects of soil-borne issues like pythium. For that reason, I think it's pretty awesome, pretty proud to say that our customers can have that peace of mind that the seed treated with Viantis, they'll have a little bit of extra protection. Is there any other takeaways or any points that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
No, the only thing I would say, and I try to include this on all my articles and everything, and if you don't know by now, I farm myself with my son, and I understand the decision making process and how tough it is, and uh, making suggestions based off experience and based off of research and everything. But at the end of the day, it comes down to your decision, and we're all going to do what we think is best for our operation. And nobody here is going to second guess what you're doing. You're doing the best you can. You're making tough decisions, and you know what the calendar looks like, and so trying to give you as much, just as much information so you can make that decision. But we certainly understand that it's your decision to make, and we're behind you. No matter what, it's a wonderful career, and it's a challenging career at the same time.
Absolutely, Craig. And on that, you saying that made me think of one other thing I think we should touch on first is, um, definitely as you're out there and as you're focusing on taking advantage of these planting windows, whether how big or how long they may be, it's important to be safe. That planting window is smaller. sometimes they just want to get out there and get done. We're kind of recently been focusing on a campaign of stop, pause, and dig while you're out there planting. Can you just kind of very quickly tell us about the importance of stopping, pausing, and digging, and what we mean by that?
Yeah, I know. Well, this year was a great example of that, because that first week when we got rolling, um, it was soil conditions were tremendous. They were as good as you'd want them any time of the year, but pretty dry. I mean, probably driven by a lot of these winds we've had this spring. So we really had to chase some moisture both in the corn and the soybeans, and that changed by field, which it always has the potential to do. So you know it's really important, not just when you start, but probably when you start every field, that you're stopping and you're getting back behind your planter and digging, or maybe you're running, and maybe your partner, maybe your son or maybe your dad is doing the digging while you continue to run. But you've got to make sure that you're getting that depth at the proper level. I like to go 2.25 inches. Everybody has their favorite, but at least 2.25 is what I say. But I probably was going 2.5, 2 to 2 3/4 to chase some of that moisture. You don't want to set that kernel in dry dirt, or even dirt that's just barely wet, and have it dry out before it imbibes and starts that germination process. So, and we did the same with soybeans. We had to go a little deeper to catch some moisture there too. So that's what we mean by stop and drop and dig, or whatever we call it.
The point is just stop, take a look.
Stop 20. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll hear that as a theme, throughout the season. It's just important to take that extra time, to do that extra scouting, or that extra adjustment, or whatever it is, because it can affect your bottom line greatly.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today's podcast, and we hope that you found this discussion informative and helpful. And make sure to check out Craig's article on the newsletter, "Solutions for Your Field." You can find this on our website, and it'll help you stay up to date on the latest agronomic insights and tips. And you can sign up by going to www.corneliusseed.com and clicking on the sign up and profit tab. We're also on Twitter now. Our handle is at Planet Profit, and you'll just see a lot of cool pictures, things that we're doing out there in the country, and just sharing a lot of this information there as well. So thank you very much, and